Thank you. Yeah, so I will go right into my first slide, which is kind of an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. By the way, can everyone see my slides and can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes, miss.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Um, all right, so I'm going to start with a little introduction to my current practice. So actually, I'm glad Eric introduced me because I was just going to introduce gear this someone who might be interested in having private practice. So I'll start with, the history of my private practice and what my qualifications were at that time. I'll talk briefly about who my clients are and what kind of collaborations I have. The next piece, the process, is where I'm really going to focus. So when I was asked this presentation, I just thought, yeah, great, I'll share what I do. And I realized there are so many facets to what I do that basically every slide here could be its own presentation. So I decided what I would focus on would really be the process and the part of this that may be a little different from what it's like to be working in an academic environment. I haven't honestly talked a lot about the statistical tools that I use, or really the technical details of what I do. I'm focusing more on the business aspects because, again, I think that might be what's different for everyone. But yeah, I'll definitely allow time for questions at the end. I'll bring up some other considerations of having a business that didn't quite fit into the process piece. And then I'll throw up some of my key points and have some time for questions. I really do want you to think of any questions you have because, again, I kind of decided for myself what I thought you might be interested in hearing. But anyone who's heard me talk about my private practice before knows I will tell you virtually anything about it. I'll tell you how much money I make if you want to know. Like I'm really very open about this. And so then I do also have a resources slide at the end. I probably won't go through it, but you should receive a copy of this presentation when Eric sends out the Zoom meeting note. So you'll have that resource slide as well. Okay. So, um, let's talk about my private practice. So, I have a private statistical consulting and collaboration practice. And I put both of those terms in there, consulting and collaboration, for a reason. I want people to, I don't want people to think that, if they're looking for a statistical consultant, that I'm not the right person, because I do kind of fit into that category for what a lot of people are looking for. But the collaboration part is also important to me because, as we'll discuss, I work with a lot of academic clients, and I really do see myself as a collaborator and my projects as collaborations rather than, somebody who just runs something in software and gives you some output, which I think is sometimes how people see consulting. So both of those are important to me to kind of gear myself. The business officially opened in January 2016, so I've been doing this for almost 10 years. I'll describe the history of that a little bit in a later slide. We have one employee in my business, so that's me. Because of my legal structure, I am technically an employee at the business, although I do often describe myself as self-employed. My business is currently home based. It didn't start out that way, but it is currently home based. As you can see, I'm just in a room in my house that has become my office. And it's also web based. I meet any clients in person at this point in time. Um, to describe the volume of what I do, I I had some data, but I also sort of guesstimated this number because not all of my projects come through the same channel. So I think I average about 50 new project requests annually. And most of those do become what I would consider to be collaborations. And so these projects for me, I said they range from 1 hour to 50 plus hours. I think I've actually billed for half an hour of my time for a meeting before. So very small projects to, for me, is a very large project. Um, and my activities, they range from answering quick questions. Someone contacts me and says, "Hey, I want to run something by a statistician. Do you have time for a meeting?" To study design if someone contacts me early enough in their process, to obviously analysis, creating reports, those kinds of things. And for many of my projects, because I am academically oriented, I do end up becoming a co-author on papers as well. This has actually really picked up for me in the last maybe 3 years. Before that, I was maybe averaging 2 or 3 papers a year. Because of a specific contract that I had, I've probably been closer to maybe co-authoring 10 papers a year for the last few years. So again, it is very academically oriented. Um, all right, so let's go on to the next slide. Let me talk about the history and starting qualifications when I opened my business. Um, and this is again, as Eric mentioned, this is one person's experience, and everybody's experience may be different. But I actually found that the things I had done before I opened this practice were really helpful. So my previous positions. Obviously, I had my university background. I do have a PhD in statistics, and I did have an assistantship while I was finishing that PhD. This was at the school that I visited Eric at later when he was running Lisa there. And I will say at the time, this is one of the reasons I contacted Eric. Technically, part of my assistantship was in their consulting center. Um, but it was not, I'll just say it wasn't what I do now, and it wasn't how I think of consulting now. And he had really changed that, how they work. And when I understood, part of it was I knew what I had before, I knew what Lisa was becoming. And that's one of the reasons I contacted him. So technically, I got a little consulting experience here. I would say, though, my PhD is mostly where I learned my technical skills, where I learned how to be a statistician. The next position I had was, the title varied between postdoc and research coordinator. And I was there for about 3 years in the forestry department at the University of Georgia. I worked with a small group where I was their only statistician. And this is where I'd say I really learned the basics of being a statistical collaborator. Because I was the only statistician in this group. I had never really had that experience before of talking to people. They were quantitative. They took a lot of measurements, they took a lot of data, and they understood what quantitative things meant, but they didn't have the background to really create the models that they needed, or sometimes to understand the statistical theory. And so this is where I really learned to speak a different language to people that do not have a strong statistical background. I remember when I first started there, I was trying to explain something to someone, and the look on their face, they were they were confused and maybe a little horrified because they literally couldn't understand what I was saying. So I really, throughout the 3 years I was there, learned to talk to people who don't have that background. And then finally, the position I had right before I started my practice was as the associate director of UGA Statistical Consulting Center. And I'd say this is where I skills up. So when I was in the forestry department, um, I only really kind of worked on one type of model, which was mixed effect models, a very complicated type of model. But when I came back to the consulting center, I could run that, but I didn't remember how to run a test in the software, and I didn't remember what a chi-square test was. So I didn't use those things, so I kind of forgot about them. And so this really, opened my skills back up. We worked with all kinds of clients, so it took me back out of one area and maybe more of a generalist. And the other thing it did, I was the associate director, but honestly, I really managed most of the day-to-day activities and the relationships with our client base, I guess. Um, and so I learned some of the background of running a center like this. I kind of learned what happens behind the scenes, and I had to do things other than statistics. And I also led a team of, I want to say, 3 to 5 graduate students each semester. So I was also getting a lot of firsthand teaching in as well. So this was the background that I had before I decided to move into private practice. I'll just say briefly, why did I decide to do that? I think after almost 10 years of evaluating the academic world. I don't think it was where I wanted, well, and if you add my PhD, I don't think it was where I wanted to really have a permanent career. I wanted a different kind of opportunity. So the initial steps that I took, oh, I apologize, my internet may have, you may have lost me for a second. So let's talk about what were the initial steps that I took. And again, as I mentioned, I include everything. I'm very open to talking about things. And the very first initial step I took was discussing this career change with my family. I think it's probably obvious why that's a good idea. But it was, in my mind, an official step that I took. I talked with them about, um, what kind of support I could offer, what kind of support they would be willing to offer me as I changed to a job that was certainly the riskiest job I've had in the sense of, will it support me? Will it last? Will it be something I'll be able to do for a long time? Will I know how to do it? I had some experience, but it's still quite different. So this was my first step. The next step was to come up with a business plan. I have a resource on the resources slide that helped me understand how business plans work, help me decide how to lay one out. This is not something I ever learned about in school, clearly. I didn't have any business background, but because I'm setting up a business, I did have to come up with a way to make sure that it was going to be profitable, that this is something I'd be able to keep doing and that I would have money to live, basically. And so coming up with a business plan that, helped me break down who my clients are, how I'll be charging, how I'll make it sustainable. That was the first business-oriented key step that I took. Then there was the legal setup. Um, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but what I did, I learned a little bit about what was required, in my county, which is like the local unit, I guess, that we live in here. Then my state and federally, what I would need to do to make sure that my business was legally set up and I could pay taxes properly. Um, in the end, though, I learned about it, but I ended up paying a lawyer to get that set up for me. And obviously, the requirements will be different no matter where you live, but I guarantee there are some legal requirements because this isn't an area I had expertise in. This was an investment that I made before starting my business. Then, of course, there was the job transition. This, I kind of got lucky. It wasn't something I could have planned on purpose, but just because of the way that leaving my position at UGA kind of came together with starting my new position. UGA, my previous job, was in a way my first client when I started my private practice. They weren't able to hire someone, which was not on purpose on my end. They did do a job search and they just didn't find anyone appropriate to fill in at the exact time I left. And so um, I kind of continued to work there part-time to smooth over the transition. So this also gave me a way to make sure I was making some money right away. And it also helped me on the other side make sure that I had everything set up properly and that I was really ready to get started. So it was almost like I had a soft opening of my business in 2016 and tailed off from my other job at the same time. So I was kind of lucky that happened, but it turned out to be very helpful. Okay. So moving on, who are my clients? Who do I collaborate with? I already mentioned that I have a focus on academic clients. That's really because this is where my background is. It's where I'm comfortable. It's where I kind of understand how things work. And so it was sort of natural for me to gravitate in that direction. So who do I work with? It's students a lot of time. And sometimes people are shocked to learn that students can work with a statistician, but it all depends on your background, what you're working on, and the standards at your university. So one big group of students I work with is people getting their doctorate of nursing practice or their DNP. Um, they are not really expected to have a strong statistics background, but they are expected to be able to learn something about the language and be able to work with a statistician. So it works out really well that I'm available and I do this. And I would say I get volume wise a lot of these kinds of clients. Then there's academic labs. I do have some labs that do more complicated research. So I one lab I recently worked with focuses on let me just simplify it to disease in pigs that we farm. And they do a lot of like things like vaccines and studying this. And so I kind of jump in as their statistician to help them with some of the more complicated models they need and help them with some of the statistical thinking. I've gotten, I often get papers, co-authorships when I work with labs, and then individual faculty researchers, which is pretty similar to working with a lab, except that it's really focuses really on one researcher instead of a group. Then I do work with some government and nonprofit clients, and I work with some corporate clients. I'll just briefly talk about these. It's very different. The flow of work and the expectations are very different. And so I think the one thing I would point out about that, now, to be clear, I work with many clients that are amazing. And ultimately, I don't work with a client very long if we don't click, I guess might be the right word. So I do actually like working with the corporate clients I work with, but the demands are different. So guess what I do? I charge more to these corporate clients. And that's fair because they're making a profit, whereas these people really aren't making a profit. They're not selling or marketing something. So this is the benefit. I mean, the main benefit of working with these clients who, for me, who have stricter deadlines, who have, more demand on my time and honestly more mental demand. Um, I charge more for those clients. So that's also helpful to me to survive in my business. So this is the focus of this presentation. It really, for me, was just the process that I use with each of these clients. That also kind of becomes the process that sustains the business as a whole. So the first thing that happens when I have a new client is this request for assistance. Academic clients, this is a link, and again, you'll get a copy of this presentation, but this is a link to where I send new academic clients so that they can learn about how I work. You'll see if you go to this web page that I really outline the process and what it's going to work with me. A lot of academic clients have not worked with a statistician, or if they have, it's been someone at their university and they don't really know what to expect. So giving them some expectation, telling them upfront, openly what it will be like to work with me is usually very helpful. And then this has a link to an actual request form that they fill out. From the request form, they receive a link to schedule a meeting with me, which is the next step. But it's pretty automated, unless they have questions they want to reach out and actually ask me. So, and I should say others are directed. So government, nonprofit, corporate clients, I direct them to contact me by email immediately. The second step is this initial meeting. There is no charge for this meeting. This is because this gives me a chance to get to know the person and the project. It gives them a chance to meet with me. If we turn out not to be a good match, if I can't really do what they're asking, if there's any reason it doesn't work out well, then there's I haven't charged them. They don't have to feel yeah, they don't have to feel like I somehow took advantage of their time. And the good thing about this is even if someone isn't a good match for me after this initial meeting, they might know someone else that wants to work with me. So this just helped. The fact that I don't charge for that just helps to keep good feelings, I think, between me and that person. I should mention though, I don't provide statistical advice at this meeting. This is just about getting to know the project and the client. I will mention, I think it bears mentioning, anytime I meet with a client, I use an adapted version of the Power process by Doug Zahn. I know we've talked about this before in Lisa. I have a link in the resources section to just a little article from, I think, 2009, maybe, where he bullet pointed the different parts of this process, but there's a lot more in-depth resources available for this as well. The third part, after the meeting, if we decide to go ahead with the project, is I create a proposal, I make an hourly estimate, and I negotiate a timeline with the client. The proposal, a lot of times, is very informal. There are some exceptions to that, but a lot of times, it's just here's what we discussed in the meeting in an email. It says, this is what I'm going to do with your data. Um, I can talk more about estimates if people have questions about it, but I do always give hourly estimates. I just find that helps me retain a little more control over what happens during the course of the project. And of course, having a timeline, basically a deadline, is a huge part of making sure that my client gets what they need from this collaboration. And I thought this was worth throwing in. Occasionally, I sign a contract, especially if I'm working with someone corporate, or occasionally a university will want me to contract with the university. Um, I would say it's not most cases, but I do review those carefully. And if I have questions, I will go through and redline things, or ask them questions about what certain things mean. Um, I haven't had one yet that I felt like I needed to go to a lawyer to interpret for me, but I would if I felt like it was important. The next thing is project work and completion. This is the longest part of this timeline. They all look the same in this diagram, but this is usually the part that takes the most time, unless it's a very short project. Um, but I will mention a couple things as I do track my time. That's extremely important in private practice, because as much as I want my clients to value the statistical work that I do, and whatever information I provide them at the end, for most clients, it's important that I do this in a reasonable budget and in a reasonable timeline. That's probably equally important to them as any technical things that I do. So it is really important in private practice just to make sure that you are tracking your time and comparing that to whatever agreement you made when you started. I do have, for longer projects, especially, I have continuous contact with my client. So if a question comes up, if there's something I'm not sure about, or if I reach a point in the analysis where I say, this isn't what we were expecting, so what should I do next? We'll have meetings as needed. Some clients want to meet a lot. Some clients prefer to try and do as much as they can by email. And I'm happy to work either of those ways, and we renegotiate as needed. So if something happens, some of my clients do want to change everything as soon as I give them a piece of information. So anytime we make changes to the original plan, but how we are important, I think, for me is I don't just have a contract that has a price for a project. And if things change, then I can also request more for my time. Um, After I do the work, oh, and I should mention the completion here, obviously, it's interesting because I spend a lot of time and energy getting to this point, but the completion is usually just an email with a report or with a link to a report, and it sometimes feels like it's not as exciting as you want it to be. But yeah, I will send it to them. Many of my clients, this is an important part in the process. I will need to follow up with them after I send them the report, and it's not that they don't want to follow up with me. It's not that they're trying to get out of paying their bill, or anything like that. It's just I think we all feel this way when we get toward the end of a project. Once we know the answers, things feel a lot less important. Yes, once we know it's happening, we it feels less rushed at that point. And so I usually do have a follow-up with my client where I will just contact them again, see if they have any questions about the report, ask if they're ready for an invoice if I haven't heard anything else. The next part is invoicing and payment. This is a part that I'm personally not that fond of. It's not that it goes bad, it's just, I don't know. I always feel a little awkward asking for money, but because of the type of job that I do, it's really important for me to remind myself this is also part of the process. Send the invoice, make sure the client received it, and if they have any special plans for payment, if they need any special arrangement for payment, to make sure that I understand that as well, so I can continue to follow up. Um, I have said in the past that maybe every year I have one person who doesn't pay for some reason, and I think I'm not going to get paid for that project. But in almost every case, they'll follow up with me like a year later and say, I'm so sorry I didn't pay this invoice. So it is actually very rare in what I do. And I'd say some of that is probably luck, but some of it is also all the steps I take up to this point. My clients pay me even when I don't ask for anything up front. So it's fine. It's just not my favorite part of the process. And then this is the part that has made my practice sustainable right here. So even though this project is over, the new project part is what makes this a cycle. And it could be a new project with the same client. If we've had a good relationship, a good working relationship, a lot of my clients, not the students always, but a lot of my clients who are labs or faculty researchers, or NGOs who do a lot of research, they'll have another project that they'll want to work with me on. With some clients, it's a referral. My students especially know other students who will be going through the same process that they do, and they will send me a referral to somebody else. So this new project part is what has kept my practice going for 10 years. I have actually never advertised formally. I have never put in an effort to do something that is specifically for advertisement. I have some thoughts on what I would do, but everything for me has been word of mouth and return clients, which has been great. There are a few other considerations I want to bring up before I go into my key points and take questions. One of these is taxes and budgeting. Um, yeah, you have to pay taxes, you have to budget. Those are just things you have to do. And I work with an accountant for my taxes. I don't do that myself. But I see that as, paying someone the same way that someone would pay me. The next thing is web page and software. I do have a web page that's on the resources slide. You can take a look at it. I do have to pay for that web page. This is one area where I have found that it's not worth it to be cheap. I do pay for that web page. I renew the domain every year. I pay for security on that web page. It's again one of those things that I think has just been a good investment. Software wise, I pay for SPSS because that's a software that a lot of my clients use. It's the one that I think the majority of my clients use. I also use R, which is free, amazingly, somehow still free, still easy to use, and not easy to use, but easy for me to use. And so that's really the software I consider. Those are other expenses. I do have some learning that I do. I learn really well from textbooks because that's the process I used for a very long time in school. But I also attend conferences to see what other people are doing, to learn about newer things. And I do occasionally do workshops and tutorials. The best ones, again, are the ones that I pay for. Um, and that's fine. That's an investment in the future of my business. And finally, I don't have anyone doing this for me. So I do need to do my own retirement planning. I do hire someone. Again, I have a financial planning company that deals with my retirement, my life insurance, disability insurance. And those are obviously insurance is something you hope you don't need, but if I ever do, I have it. And I feel like that's also important. I'm going to put up my key points. This is my email address if you have questions that you don't have a chance to ask today, because I know this is going a little bit long. But this is my email address. If you'd like to contact me, I am more than happy to answer questions for you. I'm happy. It's also on the resources page on the next slide. Um, for anyone who gets the printed version, it's not here. It'll only be on the resources slide, but I'm happy for you or anyone you send this presentation to contact me with questions about this. I'll make some key points and then I'll leave those up while I take questions. So these are really, again, from the perspective of someone who might be interested in doing this. I always tell people gain experience first. Everyone is different, but you really need to consider this carefully. I do know people who have gone right out of school to start their own practice. But just from hearing their stories, I think they have struggled more than I have, given the experience that I had when I started. So do consider strongly where can you gain the kind of experience that you want to be able to apply to your practice. My experience also is why I had a client base from various people I'd worked with by the time I started. Make a business plan. So I do have a resource again on the next slides to learn about what a business plan is, what are the different parts of it. Make a business plan and revisit it. It's tempting for me to just say, oh, well, everything's working, especially because it's just me. Everything's working. I don't need to go back and revisit my plans, but it's important to revisit your business plan because then you can find, places you've changed course. Maybe sometimes you like the way that your business has changed course and you want to change your plan to match it. Maybe sometimes you realize you're not going in a good direction with something and you want to go back more toward what the plan was. But do make a business plan and do revisit it. Be deliberate with your legal structure. This does require some investment, at least for me, unless you have a law background, or maybe a family member who's willing to help you set it up. Did require some investment on my part, but it was worth it. And yeah, and then the last part, of course, is have a process. I talked you through kind of my process for a project, and how that turned into sustainability for my business. You should have some process in mind, and along the way, make sure you're tracking things. I'm a big spreadsheet person. I probably have, 3 or 4 different places where I track things about my projects and make sure that I'm up on deadlines. I have a task list that I update regularly. Um, but the other thing is too, you need to stay flexible with your process because everyone is not going to fit into the same process that you're working with. Some people will have different needs. For some reason, I'm just going to use this as an example. It is very hard for me to respond to people by phone, by text. It's just, I think maybe it's that I like having everything in one place, which is my computer, and I can get to anything I want. But occasionally I have a client who really insists on texting me. And while I have to admit I'm maybe not the best person to work with for that person, I will also try to make it work so that I'll check and respond to their texts maybe once or twice a day. So I do try to stay as flexible as possible, to be able to work how my clients want to work. So I know that was a little bit long. I would like to take some questions, but I also want to make sure that we have time for the other parts of our meeting today. Eric, what do you think?
I think we should have questions for sure.
Okay, great. Let's see. All right, scrolling down, I see we do have one question in the chat first. Based on your experience in both academia and industry, what tools and skills should young statisticians or researchers prioritize to effectively manage projects and meet client needs? So this is a big question. Obviously, there's a lot of skills that you need to some level. And when I talk about this, I tend to minimize the statistical skills, not because they're not important, but because if you are getting a degree in data science or statistics, you will probably have the skills you need to get started and to understand a statistical problem. Um, in terms of, just to be clear, I don't work with like huge industry data sets. I tend to work with smaller data sets, designed experiments or smaller studies or secondary data. And so I end up using not necessarily the most advanced statistical things. I use a lot of classical models. Occasionally I do some bootstrapping or some machine learning type things, but a lot of times my most basic skills, things like, well, I do a lot of repeated measures is going to be super important, probably no matter what you're doing, learning some kind of model to deal with repeated measures. But a lot of times what I do for, my student clients, it's a t-test or it's a chi-square test or it's a Poisson exact test. It's little tests. So I can't really say, I think it's going to depend a lot on your client base, what technical skills you're going to need. The skills though that I think people do not get through a statistics education are those skills of um, being able to talk to a person who is not a statistician. Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I learned that from my job in forestry department where people did not speak statistics. And so taking the time to practice not simplifying analyses, but simplifying your explanation of them And being able to talk about results without talking technical details, I think is a huge skill that anyone who wants to do this should be concentrating on. I have actually had clients tell me that that's the reason they like to work with me, is because they feel like I can kind of cut through all the technical stuff and give what they consider to be a straight answer to their question. So I think that's probably the biggest skill. All right. We have, let's see, I see Benjamin's raising his hand. So Benjamin, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question. Dr. Odoy, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question? I can't hear you if you are speaking.
Maybe
Let me go ahead.
type your
Yeah.
question into the chat.
Hello.
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, I think you might have a delay, but I can hear you.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we
All
can
right.
hear you.
Can I go ahead, please, with my question?
Yes.
All right. So my question is, I want to know, what is the maximum number of projects you attend to within a year? And do you do it alone? Do you work on it alone? How are you able to achieve such particular targets?
Yeah, so that's a great question. My best estimate is that I probably work with around 50 projects per year. I do work alone in terms of, I don't have another statistician at my company that works with me, but I always work closely with the people I'm collaborating with, so it never feels like I'm working alone. But I am usually this quantitative person. And in terms of, how do I work with that many projects? A lot of them are very short projects. I have deliberately chosen not to chase big payout projects. And I feel like this is a good story, so I want to tell it. I'll try to keep it short. When I started my practice, I had someone basically offer me an opportunity to, kind of meet my financial goals for the year. I think they wanted to pay me $50,000, but they were going to basically want me on call for that $50,000. And it was really tempting because at the time I was worried about funding. I wanted to make sure I'd be able to keep going. But after more discussion with this person, I turned down the opportunity because it would have really tied my business to their business. And in retrospect, I actually still work with that person. I'm doing a big project for them right now. But in retrospect, I'm really glad that I didn't take that up, because that person ended up letting go a lot of their employees within the next 2 years. They definitely restructured, and if I had tied myself to that business for that large amount of money, my business would have gone down with their business. So in the end, kind of what I do is a lot of smaller projects. So many of those projects will just be, 1 or 2 hours that I'll spend doing a simple report for a client. And then I do have a few projects that I have to commit more time to. And I just make sure that I have my schedule clear for the deadline that they'll need. So yeah.
My last question
Mhm.
is my last question. This is a proposal. Can you recruit me as your volunteer student?
So I have tried to do this in the past. It's never quite worked out, but you know what? I'm open to it. Um, so
So
um,
I will put in my application so that I will learn from you as a
yeah,
volunteer student.
at the very least, I would be more than happy to have you kind of shadow me on some projects. And yeah, it just so you can kind of see the process. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sounds good. Um, all right. We have some more questions in the chat. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question from Dr. Asifa,
Okay.
and it's one of the
All
many
right.
questions that I also had.
Okay,
It's
so
about charging for learning time.
thank you so much, dear Kim. My question, you are charging per hour, but sometimes we need to learn techniques and it may take a lot of time. So do you include it while charging or only charge the time actually involved in data analysis? So there's kind of a mixed answer on that one. What I try to do, so first of all, when I get a project that has a skill that I know I'm not that familiar with and I'll need some time to learn about it, I'm upfront with the client that this is something I need time to learn about. If I have a brand new client who wants something that I don't do, I'm more likely to pass on that client or send them to someone else I know, than have to tell them I'm charging you 10 hours for me to learn about this. But that's one key though, is just being upfront with the time you're charging and what you're doing with that time. Where I do end up doing this more is with clients that I've worked with long term and they want to take on something new and it will require something that I don't know. And I will, again, just tell them this isn't something I do. I'd be happy to learn about it with you if you want to, learn about it with me. And then I will charge for that time. I will build it in, but that's someone I already have kind of a relationship. They know how I work and they trust my learning process. The times that I'd say I don't end up charging for it is the times where I think I know something and then I don't. Or I think, oh, I did this a long time ago and I'm sure I'll be able to do it again. And then I, look back at my previous project and it was something different. And, I have to, this happens a lot with programming things in R. Honestly, that's where I find myself miss or underestimating how much time I'm going to need to learn to do something. And in those cases, a lot of times what I'll do is I will tell my client, this is how much time I estimated, this is how much time I ended up spending. I'm willing to be flexible on this. A lot of my clients will choose to pay me for that time. Some of them don't because it wasn't in their budget, and there's not much that I can do about that at that point. And it's, it happens. So I think that's the most thorough answer I can give to that question. All right. Do I have time to answer more questions? Do we want to discuss?
Maybe one more question.
Okay. I've got 2 in the chat. Let's see. Let me go back to one of the earlier questions. That was, what would you advise for someone with the required skills, but finding it difficult to land clients, probably due to the recent change of location? So I have a couple of answers to that. One is, when I started my business, for various reasons, and it kind of just happened to work out this way, I did have a base of clients that I was able to take with me. So I can't say from personal perspective that I had that difficulty. That was one of the advantages of the positions I was in previously. However, there are a couple of things that you could do. So I'm a member of the American Statistical Association. There are similar associations in various countries and various places. We do, at least in the ASA, keep a list of people that are available for consulting, so you could always try to find something like that. I have gotten some interest from that list, but it's not that common. What I would do if I did find myself in a position that I had to find clients, I do know people who pay for advertisements when people are searching for a statistician. This will tend to get you more students. It'll tend, you have to think about who it's going to get you to work with you. And I would say it's harder to connect with people with the exact things you're looking for, but it is an option. The other thing that I would do that I think would really be my first go-to if I needed to find clients would be to go to conferences, not statistical conferences, but conferences in the area I work in. So I would, like, for me, I think a big one would be a nursing conference. I think I would have, if I presented and talked about statistics, I think I'd have a good audience there. And I think I'd probably find some people who needed statistical help. Maybe a medical conference, I would find some people there. So that would be, and of course these involve investment, but when I started my business, I literally gave myself a loan and paid it back. Like legally, it was a loan from myself. and paid it back as I got started. So I think anything that's going to result in, quality collaborations and something that's going to be sustainable is going to require probably some upfront investment. But in my case, I was able to pay back my upfront investment. So I think that's the advice I could give. Okay. Yeah. If anyone has other questions that they did not have a chance to ask, please send me an email. I will be more than happy to discuss this with you.
Great.
And
Thank you
there's
so
this
much,
resources
Kim.
slide.
And
Of
yeah.
course.
Oh, okay. So there are resources
Yeah.
that will
Well,
be available.
I talked
Maybe you
about
could
some
put
of them
that,
at the time.
you could put that slide back up and
Back
then
up. Okay.
talk about it again, just so people know
Okay.
exactly
Yeah.
which resources you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So this first one, I talked about coming up with a business plan. This business model generation is a book, but it is also kind of a method as well. Their webpage has some good resources. And I did appreciate the book a lot. It helped me understand business models in a way that didn't have require a lot of business background from me. I talked about the power process. Again, this is a sort of an article from back in 2009 where it was really just bullet pointed and simply laid out. You can get much more in-depth resources, including a book about the power process that Doug Zahn originated, and we've done a lot with over the years. I mentioned the importance of tracking time. There's some free software available for tracking projects, and it's very useful for me. When I invoice, it's only practical for me to take credit cards. So this is the platform that I use for charging. It's called Square. I don't pay for the service, but I pay on a per charge basis. And that's just how credit cards work. Somebody's going to pay for it. And honestly, there's some things where it's free and the client would pay the fees. That to me is not sending a message to my clients that they would like, so I pay the credit card fees. And here's my webpage, and again, my email address. If you have the printed version, this is where you will find my email address. So, and I'm will, if you have questions about other resources, of course, I have a bunch more. You can email me.